Hello and welcome to another edition of Conservative Corner. We are a monthly cable access show based here in Newton at the grand offices of New TV on Needham Street in Newton. And basically, our show is presented to the general audience, but we do have a particular, shall we say, ideological and political perspective in that, unlike the rest of the state or the majority of the state, which is pretty much liberal to moderate, we are a Republican-oriented show. We stress Republican views and we bring up Republican issues to the audience, and we present a rather different perspective from that which you may hear in our most liberal of states, as we've been termed nationally. We're even supposedly more liberal than California. And we enjoy presenting our perspectives because, after all, we believe we have the correct perspectives on our city and our state and, above all, our nation. There has been an ongoing issue, legal issues rather, pertaining to the Republican presidential candidate, former President Donald Trump. And what you may have seen or certainly have deciphered over the past several months with the ongoing prosecutions against Trump and the subsequent trials is that there's been a general consensus, at least in Republican circles, that these trials and prosecutions are politically motivated. And in survey after survey across America, many, if not most of the American people agree with that perspective, that in the absence of Donald Trump running for president, he wouldn't be prosecuted or subject to these trials, which some of which have already taken place and others which will probably take place. In particular, the trial that we saw a week or two ago in New York, based on his falsifying or misrepresenting, as was said, business records. It's hard to really perceive of anything like that happening were he not running for president. Now, the question is this a coordinated legal assault on Donald Trump from various district attorneys, courts, judges across the country who have a very Democrat liberal bent? It's hard to connect the dots, but common sense would dictate that this seems to be a coordinated effort. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but some of this, many of this, I should say, is not really coincidental, given that this is an election year. We're very fortunate to have with us tonight Newton resident and Boston lawyer and an election law expert who has been involved, or rather has been at the service of the Republican Party in many campaigns, really since 1984. For example, he was an election attorney covering and helping with the very controversial Bush-Gore finale in Florida in 2000. In the last election, in 2020, he went to the state of Wisconsin to oversee the recount there. So he has really been a valuable resource for the Republican Party nationwide, in addition to being a valuable resource for the state party, and he is also a member of the Republican City Committee in Newton. And I'm very proud to have with us my dear friend, Rohan Samaraweera. And if I didn't pronounce his name correctly, forgive me, but I challenge you to do the same. But nevertheless, he was originally from Sri Lanka, went to Brookline High, and graduated from, I believe, a Boston College and Boston College Law School.
Yes.
So he was educated among us and with us, and he is a staunch Republican. And Rohan, I initiated my conversation here by saying that these cases against Trump and these trials, one of which has come to fruition, has come and gone, are politically motivated. And of course, CNN, MSNBC, and the Democrats will say that they're not. What is your perspective on that?
Yeah, they seem to me to be politically motivated, but the one in New York that ended at the end of May, I think there are so many significant issues for appeal that the conviction will be overturned on appeal, but really the effect that the Democrat Party wanted, they've achieved in being able to say that President Trump has been convicted now. But there was an interesting development in the case last Friday that the acting judge, who's actually a New York Court of Claims judge, so doesn't seem to have much criminal trial experience. He's not a New York Supreme Court. He's an acting judge there, and he apparently became aware of a Facebook posting by someone who claimed that his cousin was on the jury and had disclosed to him the day before the verdict that President Trump was going to be convicted. So that raises the question whether, both President Trump's attorneys and the prosecution will have to investigate that claim. The Facebook poster's name, I believe, is Michael Anderson.
So shouldn't this be declared? Can it be declared a mistrial after the fact, or can it be thrown out on appeal because of that, where the juror was compromised? Now, first I need to qualify. I'm admitted in Massachusetts and the District of Columbia, so whatever I say about New York law has to be taken in that context. But in New York, there is a high standard for jury misconduct being discovered after trial to have the trial be considered contaminated and for a mistrial to be declared. But the court per se does not investigate that. The two parties, meaning the prosecution and the defendant, President Trump's attorneys, will have to do the discovery on that, subpoena the Facebook records, find out who this person is who posted it, what, if any, his connections are to the jurors, and whether there was, in fact, communication outside of the jury room, which, since the jury wasn't sequestered either during the trial or during deliberations, most likely there was, and then what the effect of that was. But there are so many other issues on appeal where this conviction definitely will get overturned. And my contention is, why wasn't the trial moved to a different location in New York State, out of New York City, out of that venue? Why couldn't it have been moved just based on conflict of interest, or what would you call it?
Well, several issues. One, it should have been moved out of that New York, Manhattan, because the composition of the jury pool there and the level of publicity. So, in fact, President Trump's team did move for a change of venue. That was denied. They did move to recuse the judge, Marchand, who has a terrible conflict of interest because it was disclosed that his daughter is the chief executive of a Democrat fundraising organization, which has raised over $100 million.
Well, that's absurd. That should have disqualified him right away from being the presiding judge, I think.
Well, ordinarily, a judge with substantial experience in criminal law would understand that he should have recused himself right at that point. But for some reason, the judge chose not to do so. So that's an issue that among the numerous issues that will be raised in appeal, that's one of them.
Now, so Trump is appealing, and so if he is appealing, can he really be described as a convicted felon, as the CNN and MSNBC hosts are doing?
The conviction attaches at the time that the jury verdict is pronounced.
Okay.
So, in fact, that is correct. But what I would do if I was advising President Trump at this point is because really the fact of the conviction is there, but he actually needs to be out and able to campaign, which is much more significant. So, I would immediately submit a motion in the trial court to, in fact, continue the sentencing date, which is now scheduled for July 11, which is he has to be present. And I have every confidence that in this case, the judge will sentence President Trump to jail time. I mean, having observed and read, and I have access to the transcripts, and I've read most of the details in the transcripts, the jury instructions, and some of the pleadings. And This case is so unusual because the New York State statute under which the case was brought, the statute of limitations on that particular felony has expired. So in order to be able to bring the case, they had to piggyback a federal election law violation onto it. The unfortunate thing for the New York, and this is what I don't understand about why this trial judge didn't dismiss the case immediately after the indictment was issued and the first hearing was held, is that the Federal Election Campaign Act of 1971 provides exclusive jurisdiction to the Federal Election Commission for the regulation and investigation of any federal election law violations. And then if they find it's a civil violation, they usually enter into some kind of a conciliation agreement with the party who violated it. If they think it's a criminal violation, they refer it over to the Justice Department, who's the only one who can prosecute these federal law violations. And here, both the Federal Election Commission, which evaluated these payments on the civil side, and the Southern District of New York, the U.S. Attorney's Office, who would have been able to criminally prosecute the case if they decided to do so, both evaluated the facts and decided that wasn't the case here.
Well, then obviously the judge, A, he didn't recuse himself, even though there was a conflict of interest with his daughter being a fundraiser for the Democrat Party, and B, he surely was aware of this law, but chose to ignore it. And you know, there's a, and I don't believe in coincidences, especially in an election year when politics involved in cases. July 11th, his sentencing date is on a Thursday. July 15th, the convention, Republican National Convention, starts in Milwaukee, where Donald Trump will receive the nomination for president by acclamation. So we have the sentence barely 3 or 4 days before the convention. Is this a coincidence? I hardly think so. And what will happen at the sentencing? There's fears and speculation among some Republicans or some people who are uninformed that, I mean, when you're sentenced, and theoretically, you could be taken out in handcuffs and put in jail. What is the possibility of that happening to Donald Trump? Could he miss his own convention?
You know, that's a possibility. If the New York sentencing guidelines were strictly followed for this particular conviction, he shouldn't actually be sentenced to any jail time whatsoever as a first-time offender, and the nature of the convictions, the nature of the statute under which he was convicted. But having observed what this judge has done, I'm fully convinced that he will sentence the president to jail time, and whether the sentence will be immediately imposed to be served, you know, starting the next day, or whether it'll be, you know, deferred, I don't know. That's
I wouldn't put anything past this judge, and based on what he's done so far, I mean, think of it. And I think that it was intentional. I mean, in other words, he could have had that sentencing date. Say, for example, the convention ends the 19th of July. He could have had that on, what, the 24th of July after the convention. So I think, and I'm not being cynical, I think I'm being realistic in that this was a deliberate target date for the judge right before the convention so that he could further humiliate Trump and perhaps even take the unusual, maybe even unprecedented step of trying to, or hauling him off to jail.
On this particular point, there is a standard in New York, which is, it's about 6 weeks after the conviction, the date of the conviction, where the usual time frame for scheduling the sentencing, but it could have been, you know, conducted as a hearing and then fully explained about the convention and the need to defer the sentencing date. That discussion does not appear in the transcripts. It was just a discussion about when should we schedule, both President Trump's attorney and the the prosecution just said that the date is about
So
6 weeks.
That's really a key date.
Yeah,
I mean,
it is.
that's really a key, an extraordinary date for them to do that at this time, I would think. Tell us about the much talked about Georgia trial and what the likelihood of that is, because there's several trials. There's several trials going on pertaining to President Trump. Could you tell us briefly
Sure.
what the result of the Georgia trial is?
So this is the famous prosecutor in Georgia. I think her name is pronounced Fani Willis. And what had happened there was she had appointed essentially her boyfriend to prosecute, be the special prosecutor. He didn't have any criminal law experience. And so there was a hearing about the conflict, and the judge essentially ruled in the trial court that either Ms. Willis's entire office would get disqualified or she could relieve the special counsel of his duties. And so she chose the latter, but the trial judge also recognized that this is a substantial issue with respect to the prejudicing the trial, so he allowed in his ruling that it could be appealed right away. It's called an interlocutory appeal in legal parlance. So President Trump's Georgia trial team took a petition to the Georgia Supreme Court to ask if we can file the appeal, and they just got permission, I believe last week, with the ruling saying yes, the appeal is ripe, let's file it and get it heard, and that appeals court stayed the trial until the ruling on the appeal. So that trial is not going to occur until, well, I would say after the election. So that's an important point about
again, I think that this is politically motivated, and so now that the Democrat attorneys and prosecutors in Georgia know that it will be postponed until after the trial, it will be interesting to see if they'll even pursue it after the trial, or I'm sorry, after the election. After the election. So, in other words, if they can't get it done before the election, there's no reason for them to really pursue it after the election. And I think that will just quietly go away. Do you think that could happen?
I hesitate to say what they will do down there, because one never knows how vindictive these prosecutors can become.
Yes.
Because these are the type of cases which just this is not what the Democrat. It's really ironic to say that we're saving democracy by
indeed.
Trying to preclude it.
Well, I
court
think in that
cases.
Georgia trial, what they'll do is, let's say if Trump loses, it will go away. They'll have no reason to pursue it. If Trump wins, then they will pursue it after the election. That could be the tactic that they're going to take. But I want to bring up also, and there was also one in Washington, D.C. about the documents pertaining to Trump that there. Could you tell us briefly what that's all
Well,
about?
they're actually two separate cases by this so-called special prosecutor, Jack Smith. The case in the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia is for the January 6th related
They call it an insurrection. We call it a
it was
disruption.
it was a small
incursion.
demonstration in the Capitol. And so this prosecutor, Smith, is pursuing the President Trump for those trying to attach criminal liability to the president for the actions that occurred in the Capitol on January 6th. The same special prosecutor, Jack Smith, has a case in Florida, in one of the U.S. District Court divisions in Florida, for the documents. Those are the so-called classified documents that the president had in one of the storage closets in Mar-a-Lago where his home was raided. The interesting thing about something that's common to both of those cases is former U.S. Attorney General Ed Meese filed an amicus brief in the U.S. Supreme Court that got very little attention at the time it was filed, because it was filed, I believe, in when there was a gag order issued against President Trump in the U.S. District Court in the District of Columbia. That got appealed up to the Supreme Court, and Attorney General Meese had filed this amicus brief saying that the appointment of this person, Mr. Smith, as the special prosecutor violates the Constitution's Appointments Clause provision. And there is this provision in the U.S. Constitution about how federal appointments go through Senate confirmation and so forth. And special prosecutors have to be Senate confirmed. So only existing U.S. attorneys who are Senate confirmed can be appointed as special prosecutors. And Mr. Smith, for all purposes, is actually a private citizen.
So now, will those two cases, the one in Florida and the one in Washington, will those be concluded by the election?
Well, the Florida District Court judge has said that she wants to hear argument on this issue about the Appointments Clause and whether, as a result of this appointment that does not comply, whether Mr. Smith can appropriately be considered as the special prosecutor, and therefore what must be done about the charges. The U.S. District Court judge in the District of Columbia has not taken that issue head on, although I must say that what was interesting was the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia, when they heard argument on one of President Trump's appeals, it was the intermediary appeal on the gag order, they asked about this very issue in the brief, and President Trump's appellate attorney declined to address it. I hope it gets some traction in the U.S. District Court.
Now, just for clarification for our viewers and frankly for myself, in Washington, D.C. and Florida, are those are the prosecutors federal prosecutors or district or state?
Those two cases are both in the U.S. District Court, so they're federal cases.
Okay, so those are federal prosecutors under the Biden Department of Justice.
Correct.
I see. So they're Democrat federal prosecutors theoretically under their Department of Justice. So this is a Biden Department of Justice prosecution of Donald Trump.
Correct. It's the same individual, Jack Smith, the same person in both the U.S. District Court January 6th case and
yes,
the Florida, the Mar-a-Lago documents case, if you will, the classified documents case. And if that individual is not appointed according to the constitutional provisions requiring Senate confirmation, he doesn't have the power to pursue this, so the indictment should be dismissed altogether.
Certainly. You know, Rohan, I've lived through a lot of presidents. I'm not that old, but I've lived through presidents since Dwight Eisenhower, and I've been a political junkie, my God, since the Nixon-Humphrey election in 1968. But I can never remember in any of the elections that I've followed over the many years that where such a political witch hunt has been launched by an existing president against a challenging candidate from either party. We've never seen this before. I mean, granted, things have happened obviously after a president was elected with Richard Nixon, but that was after he was elected. But never have we seen a challenging candidate to an incumbent president be so prosecuted and quite frankly persecuted from a political perspective in this realm. And I think that you would really have to search very hard in American history to find such an egregious travesty of justice. In other words, just the misappropriation and misrepresentation of the Justice Department, to really go after a candidate from another party. And you know, these things were done in shall we say banana republics and in the former communist countries of Eastern Europe. I mean, this is really unheard of. And I think that I get the impression that the world is really looking at us from a sarcastic, negative perspective, that we're supposed to be the champions and leaders of democracy throughout the world. And here we are, a sitting president and his Justice Department going after his challenger. It's really unheard of, and I think unprecedented.
Well, I don't think you have to search history very far. It's never occurred before in this country. Of course, what the Biden administration and their supporters would say is there's no evidence that the president is behind this. But
it's his Justice Department.
Correct. And I think with respect to even the coordination of some of these prosecutions, which I think it's been reported in the media that there have been meetings and so forth at the White House, if there is any post-prosecution civil case against any of either the Georgia State prosecutor or the New York prosecutor, where there can be actual discovery done and the emails and communications unearthed, that might actually indicate what the facts are. I don't think it's a big stretch to think that that's occurred, but right now, you know, as a lawyer, I would reserve judgment from 35 years of litigation where I'd actually want to see the evidence before.
But I also think, and polls have indicated, that this is really backfiring with the American public, and that, you know, there's a small percentage of the public which is not following which are not following these cases and really don't care. And then there's a very large percentage, and I don't have the figures in front of me, where people know that it's, or feel that it's politically motivated and don't care that Trump was convicted last week. In fact, if you look at the amount of donations which are put into the Trump campaign, I believe that it's in the tens of millions, if not hovering in close to the hundreds of millions, as a backlash and as a result of what people rightfully see as an egregious persecution of a former president running again for president.
Yeah, I mean, the fundraising since then has just been through the roof for President Trump's campaign. There's one thing, last comment I'd like to make about the New York conviction is that, and I don't know whether you know, this will ever reach his New York trial team, but I believe, and my research has indicated, that President Trump's team can take it directly to the Supreme Court under the original jurisdiction provision in 28 U.S.C. section 1251B. The court has previously pronounced that, that's the Supreme Court, that they don't want to take on, under their original jurisdiction, state convictions without them coming through the usual appellate process. But this is such a highly unusual case where a federal statute where the Congress has completely preempted the field that is in the election law area, that when you actually research those cases, the Supreme Court opinions indicate there are circumstances under which they would take original jurisdiction.
One further question, because we're almost out of time. It's the fastest 30 minutes in cable TV. Trump becomes president, could he pardon himself?
I don't know that that's ever been done. I don't think he'd need to. I mean, you could just order his Justice Department to stop.
Excellent. Rohan, again, thank you for coming on, and hopefully these things will get resolved before the election, and the American public will see the witch hunt for what it is against President Trump by the sitting president and his Justice Department. Thank you again, Rohan.
You're welcome.